Every midnight, my husband slipped into our late son's room. No light, no sound. After 3 weeks, I installed a hidden camera. Yes, I broke his trust. When I hit play, I expected breakdowns or secrets. What I saw was nothing I'd guessed. Careful hands, a list of boys' names, and a ritual that shouldn't exist. I confronted him, and that's when the real shock started. If you're hearing my story, please subscribe so more voices like mine can be heard. Our house sits on a quiet street near the railroad, 1 mile from the church and 2 from the grocery. We have lived here 25 years. The paint knows our hands. The porch knows our Sunday shoes. I'm 58, a grandmother, an usher, a retired school secretary who still sorts mail by habit. My husband is a mechanic who keeps his tools clean and his words few. He believes in doing things once and doing them right. Our daughter lives 10 minutes away with our grandson, who fills our Fridays with crumbs and crayons. We keep the freezer stocked with casseroles folks brought after the funeral, and we keep the blinds down just enough to get through each day. Most evenings look the same. I wipe the counters twice. I dry the sink and fold the towel straight. He lines his boots by the mat and checks the back door twice. We carry our grief in plain sight because it is too heavy to hide. The bedroom across the hall stays closed. Spring came and left, and the room kept the smell of his lotion and the dust on the trophies. The framed jersey sits on a chair because I never hung it. My husband dusts the hallway shelf but never touches that doorknob by daylight. He waits for the clock to pass midnight. Then the steps begin. I did not want to be a wife who spies on her husband. I also did not want to be a widow in the same house while my husband drowned next door. The second thought won. I ordered the camera from a discount site. It came in a small box with a cord and a sheet of tiny print. I read every line. I tested the angle on the bookshelf behind the photo albums. I set the motion alert and muted the sound so I wouldn't wake him. I told myself I would watch only if I had to. Then the first alert buzzed before my hands stopped shaking. The first night, I did not watch. I stared at the progress bar and let it finish. The blue dot sat there like a dare. I turned off the phone and folded laundry that didn't need folding. I pressed my palm on the dryer and felt the thrum anyway. The second night, I watched 10 seconds and closed the app. The third night, I dragged the video forward without sound, then backward, then forward again, as if the truth would look better from another angle. Each small step felt wrong. Each small step felt necessary. People mean well, and they do what they can. The neighbors bring pound cake and ask how we're holding up. The pastor stops by and leaves a list for a men's group. Our daughter checks our fridge and calls every evening at 7. We nod and say thank you and say we're okay. After they leave, my husband sets the washer to finish at midnight. He empties the lint trap like it matters more than breathing. He checks the back door, the stove, the porch light. Then he walks down the hall and turns the knob I cannot touch. On the 4th day after I set the camera, I cooked early and set 2 plates, but he ate standing at the counter. He barely chewed. He rinsed his fork and wiped the sink again like I had missed a spot. He said he needed to check the oil on the family car, but he stayed in the kitchen, wiping the same circle on the counter. He was waiting for midnight, though he would never say that out loud. I said I would turn in early. I did not. I sat at the table and lined up the salt and pepper and watched the clock push toward the hour I hated. The video began like every night in my mind. The door opened. He stepped inside. The door clicked shut, but the shape of him looked different through that small lens, as if the weight of the room pressed his shoulders down. He carried a shoebox. He held it tight, both hands under it, the way you hold a baby you're not ready to let go. He set it on the desk and stayed still. The camera caught the rise of his chest and the small shake in his fingers. He stayed 30 minutes and left without turning on a light. I did not sleep until dawn. Morning brought everyday tasks. I ironed a shirt he would have ironed himself. I watered the plants my sister gave us. I packed a small bag of snacks for our grandson, who was due after school. My husband left early for the shop and forgot his lunch. I wrapped it in foil and set it in the fridge. I stood at the doorway of the closed room and counted to 10. I pressed my fingers to the paint and pulled them back fast like I had touched a hot stove. I was not ready to open it. I was ready to keep watching. By the 7th night, the pattern grew clear. He waited for the washer. He timed his steps to the spin cycle. He moved down the hall and inside that room and left within the same narrow window. I set the app to download on my phone because I knew I would not be able to sit still long. I would watch in the car if I had to. I cleaned the kitchen again, then gathered a stack of photo albums to move to the closet, then stopped because the camera needed that angle. I hated that thought and kept it anyway. I lowered my voice when our daughter called. I told her we were fine. She said our grandson wanted to bring over his spelling list to show Granddad. I said that would be good. She said she could also bring by a meatloaf. I said we still had casseroles to finish. She paused and said she would come by anyway. I looked at the door down the hall and knew I needed to keep that door closed until I knew what lived inside it at night. At the 200th word of this story, I had hoped to be done with watching. I was not. I was only getting better at it. I learned how to scrub the video without missing a movement. I learned how to read my husband's shoulders by shape alone. I learned the weight of the shoebox, the angle of his hands, the way he stood still when the house settled. Each new detail gave me a little more air. Each new detail scared me. On the 9th night, a new detail arrived. He brought a folded towel and a small bottle. He carried them with the care you use for something you don't want to spill. He closed the door soft and stayed 32 minutes. When he came out, his hands were steady. He walked past the kitchen and did not see me, though I was sitting still. He went to bed without a word. I watched the video twice and still did not understand what he was doing in there. I grew up in a house where you kept your vows by doing your part. You didn't slam doors. You didn't throw words like knives. You kept the lights paid, the lawn cut, the choir robe pressed, and the Sunday bulletin folded even when your hands trembled. You took your pain to God in the morning and to the sink at night. You did not set cameras in bedrooms. But today's tools exist, and a mother uses what she must to keep the ground under her feet. By the 12th night, I was sure of this much. My husband wasn't crying in there. He wasn't sleeping on the floor. He wasn't drinking. He wasn't scrolling on a phone. He was doing tasks. He was setting items on the desk, moving them in small lines, and leaving them in an order that made sense only to him. He was building something I could not see yet. The thought made my chest hurt and my hands steady at the same time. That afternoon, the pastor called again. He mentioned the men's group and a time they meet. I thanked him and said my husband was working late most nights. He said he understood and that the door would stay open. I said we appreciated that. After I hung up, I stood at the sink and thought about doors. Some you open because you're ready. Some you open because someone you love keeps walking through them alone. I didn't need the alert on the 13th night. My body knew the time. When the washer clicked, I opened the app and set the phone flat on the table. I told myself I would watch it all the way through, start to finish, without jumping ahead or looking away. I told myself the truth was better than another week of guessing. The door opened in the video. He stepped inside with our son's quilt folded over one arm and the family Bible under the other. He closed the door and stood very still. I held the table and watched him spread the quilt on the floor and place the Bible on the desk. He opened the shoebox and took out a notebook and a handful of small items I couldn't name from the camera angle. He unscrewed the bottle and set the towel nearby. He looked like a man ready to do work he had planned all day. He looked like a father inside a room that still held his child's breath. I leaned closer to the screen. I decided that night that I would cue every recording and watch them in one stretch. I would sit still and let the truth come in the order it happened. I would not stop and fold laundry. I would not scrub back and forth. I would start at the first blue dot and move straight through to the last. When the clock struck midnight again, I plugged in my phone and set the volume low. The house was quiet. The room was not. Our house sits 3 blocks from the tracks and 1 mile from the church. It's a low, one-story place with a porch that sags a little in summer and holds pumpkins in fall. The paint knows our hands. The windows stick if you don't lift at the left corner first. After 25 years, a home learns you. I'm 58. I usher on Sundays and keep a peppermint stash in my purse for fidgety kids. I used to run the school office, attendance slips, bell schedules, spare pencils, until last year when breathing started to feel like a job all by itself. My husband is a quiet man who talks with his tools. He comes home smelling like warm metal and citrus degreaser. He wipes every wrench before he puts it back. If a thing squeaks, he hears it before anyone else does. We raised 2 children here. Our daughter lives 10 minutes away, driving a car that rattles because she still turns the radio too loud. Her boy, our grandson, spills crumbs like confetti and brings Friday noise that shakes the dust off our picture frames. Our son. His room stays closed most days. Folks leave covered dishes by our door with notes taped under the foil. We send back the pans clean. We never know what to write on the thank you cards, so I write, "You were thoughtful." We felt it. Grief made our house small. We moved through it by route. Coffee, mail, couch. He checks the porch light, the back lock, the water heater pilot. I stack the church bulletins to bring for recycling and fold towels in thirds because halves feel messy now. There are more routines than conversations. We say, sleep good and drive safe and need anything at the store. The rest we carry in our backs and our teeth. The room across the hall is still the color he chose at 16, a brave blue I thought was too dark then. His trophies lean on each other like they're tired. A jersey sits on the chair that should be for reading. The quilt at the foot of the bed is the one my mother stitched, little squares from old dresses and Easter shirts. I stand at the threshold sometimes and straighten the framed photo by the door, then walk away without going in. My husband never touches that knob by daylight. Neighbors try in the only ways they know. Mrs. Halverson leaves pound cake and asks if I'm eating enough. The Johnson boys mow our strip of grass along the sidewalk when they do their own. The pastor stops by most Wednesdays. He sits with his hat in his lap and says our son's name out loud, careful and kind. He invites my husband to the men's breakfast. My husband thanks him and says he opens the shop early on Saturdays. Evenings are quiet. We eat at the counter because the dining table feels too wide. I wipe the counters twice. He dries the sink until it shines. He lines his boots by the mat, left then right, laces tucked in. We watch the 6 o'clock news without turning the volume up. If our daughter calls, I put her on speaker and we both say, "Uh-huh," and "That's good, baby." When our grandson visits, the house remembers how to laugh. When he leaves, the corners get heavy again. I keep the church schedule pinned to the fridge, choir rehearsal, pantry day, communion Sunday. I show up for the parts that require showing up. It helps to pour juice into tiny cups and count them twice. The doing steadies me. After service, women hug me too long or not long enough. They say it gets easier. They say time is a healer. I nod because they need me to nod. My husband's hands stay busy. If he isn't at the shop, he's in the garage, sorting screws that already look sorted, sanding a 2x4 that doesn't need sanding. He checks tire pressures like a ritual. He doesn't say he misses the sound of our boy running into the kitchen for a second sandwich after practice, but he lingers near the bread box at 10:30, like an old habit he can't place. I started baking on Thursdays, even when I don't want cake. It gives the house a warm smell, and it gives me a reason to stand without thinking. I use the recipe card with butter stains because it feels like company. When the oven timer rings, the sound is too cheerful for our kitchen, so I turn it off fast and let the cake finish in silence. Sometimes I catch my husband standing in the hall at noon, just looking down toward that closed door. He'll reach for his pocket, find it empty, and pretend he came to check the thermostat. If I speak his name, he blinks and asks if I've seen the mail key. We've kept our grief polite, the way we were raised. We don't slam, we don't shatter. We keep the lawn neat and the blinds half drawn. We make space for each other's quiet. At night, I hear the washer finish its last cycle just before midnight. It's a habit he started after the funeral, said it helped him keep ahead for morning. He clears the lint trap like he's clocking out of one day and into another. Then the house goes still. The blue nightlight in the hall makes a small lake on the floor. Somewhere in there, the old doorknob turns. People say grief slows with time. Maybe they are right in the way rain slows after the storm ends. But lately, time runs strange in our rooms. Days feel thin and nights get thick. And while everyone else expects less crying, less aching, I keep seeing more. More midnight steps, more careful hands, more visits to the room we promised we wouldn't live inside. Everyone says it should be easing. So why is he visiting that door more, not less? After the funeral, my husband began setting the last load to finish at exactly 12:03 a.m. He said it kept mornings simple. He said it saved the meter from peak rates. Maybe both were true. But one night, I stood in the hall and felt the pattern settle like a clock I hadn't noticed before. Spin, click, silence. Then his steps. He would clear the lint trap, wash his hands, dry them slow, and walk down the hall like he was measuring boards. He never turned on the hall light. The blue nightlight was enough. He'd pause at our son's door, breathe once, then turn the knob. The latch gave its tired little click. The door closed soft. Every night, the same. At first I told myself it was grief taking a simple route, sitting in the dark, holding a jersey, letting the ache run its course. But the visits sharpened instead of fading. He went in at 12:09, then 12:07, then back to 12:05 like he was keeping a promise to the minute. He stayed 28 to 34 minutes. I wrote those numbers on the back of a grocery list and tucked it under the sugar bowl like it might change something. He missed morning prayer twice. That was new. He never missed it before. Not in 30 years of marriage, not when the transmission failed on a Monday, not when the flu caught both of us in January. Now, the chair by the window sat empty at 6:30 a.m., and the coffee he set the night before went cold. He started washing his phone screen more than usual, like a man wiping grease after a repair. The browser history was clean as a new sink, clean in a way that was louder than mess. I am not a jealous woman. I am a careful one. A careful woman counts what's steady so she knows when the ground shifts. The ground had shifted, and it had nothing to do with other people. This was home business. This was a man walking into a closed room at night and coming out quiet like he'd worked a shift no one paid him for. On the 20th night, he paused at the table where I sat with a crossword puzzle I had no intention of finishing. He touched my shoulder and said, "You good?" I said, "I'm good." He nodded like we had traded something important and went down the hall. I set my pencil down and watched the clock crawl toward the hour. I felt the press of a line I didn't want to cross and the pull of a fear I didn't want to name. I ordered the camera the next morning. It came 2 days later, small as a matchbox, with a cord and instructions printed in a font that made me squint. I read every line twice. I told myself this was not about catching him. This was about catching the truth before it slipped past us for good. I walked through that doorway for the first time in weeks with the box in my hand. The air was still, like a room waiting on a bell. I put the camera on the bookshelf behind the photo albums, angled low. I tested the view. Desk, bed corner, door. I adjusted the family photo frame a hair's width to hide the wire, then adjusted it back because hiding was not the point. I set motion alerts to silent. I tucked the app in a folder on my phone called Notes because I could not bear to see it on the home screen. All day, I moved through chores on automatic. I baked cornbread I didn't plan to eat. I wiped crumbs from a clean counter. I folded towels into neat rectangles that looked like hotel rooms. When the pastor called to check in, I stood by the sink and watched my reflection in the dark window while I thanked him for the invitation to the men's group. "He leaves early," I said. "He's been tired." The words were true. They were also not all of the truth. That night, the washer clicked off at 12:03. I stayed in my chair at the kitchen table. He cleared the lint trap. The quiet steps came down the hall. The door opened and closed. My phone buzzed once in my lap. I didn't look. I waited for him to come back out, then waited 3 more minutes for my own breath to settle. Only then did I open the app. A grainy blue picture. The quilt's corner, the desk, the shape of my husband's back as he stood still, hands at his sides. He lifted a shoebox and set it on the desk like it mattered where it sat. He opened a small bottle, something dark, and set a folded towel beside it. He didn't turn on the lamp. He worked by memory in the thin light from the hall. I closed the app. My heart had decided it would run the rest of the night without asking me. The next 2 nights, the pattern held. He entered at 12:05. He stayed about half an hour. He brought a notebook the second night and our family Bible the third. He turned the pages slow, like he feared tearing them. He wrote something. He paused and wrote again. He slipped the notebook into the shoebox before he left. On the 4th night, I watched all the way through. No sound, just the steady rhythm of his hands. He wiped something with the towel. He oiled something with drops from the bottle. He lifted our boy's glove and worked the leather with his thumbs. He set it down and smoothed the quilt, a motion so gentle I felt it in my throat. I am not proud of the secret. I am not ashamed of the care. Grief makes a different kind of math. You count what keeps a person here. You count steps. You count minutes. You count the courage it takes to look when you'd rather sleep. By the end of that week, I knew 3 things. He was not crying in there. He was not lost. He was doing work. Work he would not name. Work that asked for midnight and a closed door. Work that kept him from morning prayer because something about dawn felt like after, and he was still in the middle of the doing. So I set the phone on the table, plugged it in, and cued every recording in order. I would watch them straight through. I would know what he was building in the quiet. Night 1, with the camera running, I only watched the shape of him. The way he stood told me enough. Shoulders forward, head bowed, hands steady. He set a shoebox on the desk as if the wood might bruise. He opened it and took out, I couldn't tell, small things. He worked in the blue light without touching the lamp. Night 2, he carried a folded towel and a small, dark bottle. He poured 3 drops onto the towel and worked something in his hands. Slow circles, patient thumbs. The camera caught the soft shine spreading, then his fingers testing the edges like a nurse checking a pulse. He wiped the excess on the towel's corner and folded it back on the desk with clean corners, the way he folds his shop rags. Day reset. I made biscuits for our grandson. My husband buttered one, then handed it to me like he'd made it. He asked about the church pantry schedule. He nodded at all the right words and missed the thread. When he left for the shop, he checked the porch light switch in daylight, then caught himself and smiled at nothing. A careful man floating a little off the floor. Night 3, he came in with our son's quilt over his arm, the family Bible under his hand, and a notebook pressed against his chest. He spread the quilt on the floor. He set the Bible down and ran his fingers along its spine. He opened the notebook and wrote, then stopped, then wrote again. He slid the notebook into the shoebox when he left, like putting a thought to bed. I told myself to stop. I told myself this was enough. Then I watched again, looking for the thing I had missed. The neighbor across the street waved me over the next afternoon. She said there's a counselor in town who works with parents, real gentle, no pressure. I said I'd pass the name along. She looked at me like she wanted to hand me a ladder and I'd refuse the first rung. The pastor left another message. Men's breakfast, Saturday at 8, he'll save a seat. My husband said, tell him thank you, and set an alarm for 4:45 a.m. to get a jump on the shop. He turned it off in his sleep. Night 4, he brought in something long wrapped in a towel. He unrolled it on the desk. A narrow board or a bat blank, I couldn't tell from the angle. He ran his palm down its length, then sanded. Small, slow strokes I could almost hear through the silence. He checked the grain at the end like it could answer him. He set it aside and picked up our boy's glove. He oiled the laces and pressed them between his fingers, working memory back into leather. I paused the video there and rested my forehead on my wrist. The mystery had shifted. Whatever this was, it wasn't about clinging. It was about making. Day reset. Our daughter dropped by with leftover spaghetti and a list of school fundraisers. My husband tightened the cabinet hinge while she talked, then asked our grandson how many free throws he could make in a row. 7, he said, 9 on a good day. My husband said, "I believe you," and patted his shoulder twice. When they left, he stood in the doorway as if listening for echoes. Night 5, he laid out tools, small screwdrivers, a bone folder, a needle threaded with heavy waxed string. He mended the corner of the quilt with 6 tiny stitches, knots tucked neat. He turned a page of the Bible and placed his hand flat on the paper, as if taking an oath no one asked him to make. Then he wrote in the notebook for a long time, the pen stopping and starting, like a man pulling a stuck nail from seasoned wood. I started seeing signs in daylight, a faint ring of oil on the garage workbench, a strip of sandpaper folded in his back pocket, a sticky note near the phone with 3 first names and a check mark next to one. He ate standing up more often. He sat down less. He slept like a person between trains. By the end of the week, the blue dots on my phone lined up like beads on a string. I scrolled them with my thumb and felt the weight of every midnight. I wanted to ask him what he was building, but the question felt like walking into a church service late and loud. I set a rule for myself. 1 stretch, start to finish, no scrubbing. I plugged the phone in. I breathed like I was about to carry something heavy. And then I watched. Night 6. He rubbed the glove's pocket and shaped it with a ball wrapped in twine. He pulled the laces snug and tied them with a small, proud tug. Night 7. He sanded the long piece again, checking the taper, sighting down its length like a carpenter eyeing a true line. He penciled markings at the handle and erased them, then marked again. Night 8. He opened the shoebox and stacked envelopes in a neat pile. Some had stamps, some had names written on the back flaps. He placed one on top and rested his palm there a long time before moving it to the bottom. Night 9. He copied something from the open Bible into the notebook. Short lines, names nested between them. He paused over each name like stirring a pot and checking the seasoning. Night 10. He folded the quilt's edge again, checked his stitches, and smiled the way he smiles when a stubborn bolt finally loosens. The pattern was not changing. It was deepening. What had looked like wandering in the dark now looked like a schedule. What had felt like circling felt like steps. The pastor stopped by that afternoon. My husband met him on the porch and thanked him for the invite, said maybe next month. He was working through some things with his hands. The pastor nodded and didn't press. He looked past my husband toward the hall and said our son's name with that careful softness again. My husband closed his eyes when he heard it. The pastor left a pamphlet anyway, tucked under the salt shaker, where men pretend they don't see things they might need. Night 11. I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A list taped to the inside of the desk drawer. He checked it with his finger, 1 line at a time, the way he checks a parts order at the shop. He lifted the bat-shaped board and set it by the door with a sticky note I couldn't read. He wiped the desk clean with the folded towel and turned the doorknob to leave. He paused, looked back once, then slipped out. I caught myself holding my breath for him. By night 12, the questions had sharpened to points. Why the precise start times? Why the list of names? Why the envelopes with stamps already on them? Why the bat blank measured and sanded but never finished in the garage like everything else? I didn't have answers. I had a camera and a chair and a phone that buzzed once a night and a husband who came to bed with sawdust in the lines of his hands. I cued the last 2 recordings and set the phone down like it might break if I held it wrong. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. Whatever this was, it had moved past secret and into sacred, and I didn't know where that left me. I pressed play. I lined the videos in order and let them run like one long midnight. The door closed. The blue light held. My husband stood a moment with his hand on the knob as if asking permission from a room that could not answer back. Then he turned to the desk and began. He cleared a small space with the folded towel, slow, careful swipes, like a man setting a table for one honest meal. From the shoebox, he lifted our boy's glove. He laced his fingers into the pocket and pressed his thumbs in slow circles. The small bottle tipped 3 drops onto the towel. He warmed the oil between his palms and worked it into the leather until dull gave way to soft shine. He threaded a lace through a stubborn eyelet and tugged it snug with the neat little pull I have seen him use on radiator hoses and apron strings. He set the glove aside and unrolled a long shape wrapped in the towel, a bat blank. Pale wood, rough at the handle, square at the tip. He sighted down its length, turned it, checked it again. The sandpaper whispered across the grain, small strokes, steady. He paused to mark a pencil line where the barrel should swell, erased it, and drew it again a hair closer to true. Each pass changed the wood from raw to almost. He opened the Bible like you open a window. 2 hands, quiet respect, no flourish. He turned to a page already softened by use, slid the shoebox close, and took out the notebook. On the first line, he wrote a verse in his careful print. Under it, he wrote a name. Then another, a row of boys. First names I recognized from sign-up sheets, church rosters, snack schedules, and the backseat noise of our car rides home after practice. He tapped the pen after each one, as if taking attendance in his heart. He knelt. No sounds on my phone, only the small tilt of his shoulders and the stillness of a man who knows where to put his grief when words won't do. He laid his hand flat on the quilt, fingers spread like he could bless what lay beneath. He bowed his head and stayed there long enough for my own breath to find a rhythm inside his. He rose, sat, and began to write letters. Not long, 2, maybe 3 pages each. He held the pen like a tool and stopped when the lines mattered. He folded the first letter and pressed the crease with the side of his thumb. He slid it into an envelope already stamped. On the back flap, a name. Jamal. On the next, Theo, then Marcus, then Aaron, Elijah, Darnell, names I have whispered in prayer and yelled from metal bleachers on cold evenings. He stacked the envelopes with the flap side up, like a careful promise. He cleaned the desk again and reached for the bat blank. He rubbed the handle with a scrap of cloth until the wood took a quiet sheen. He lifted it by the knob, practiced a small, gentle swing toward the open air, then rested the barrel against his shoulder like a father letting a child fall asleep there. He set it by the door and stuck a yellow note to the knob end. The camera couldn't catch all the words. It caught enough. For Jamal. Keep swinging, I pressed pause and covered my mouth with both hands. Not to hide tears, there were none yet, but to keep from saying a name into an empty room. The next night flowed into the last-like chapters of the same book. He brought a ball wrapped in twine and worked it into the pocket of the glove. Press, roll, tie. Press again, until the leather held the round shape like it had learned to catch all over. He mended a frayed edge of the quilt with 6 stout stitches. Knots tucked so neat, I thought of my mother's hands and how she showed him once, laughing when he asked to learn. He turned another page in the Bible and copied a new verse. Short, strong lines that have met men in storm and harvest, and hospital rooms, and held. Then the list. He pulled the desk drawer and lifted a sheet of paper I had not seen before. Taped inside the drawer, crowded with first names and checkboxes. This was not a list of tasks. It was a roster of love. Some boxes held dates. Some held tiny notes. Tryouts. Math test. Helped carry gear. Quiet lately. Ask about brother. He ran his finger down the column to a blank box, checked it, and wrote tomorrow's date beside it. He wrote an address on an envelope and tucked the letter inside. He stood, took the bat blank from where it leaned, and set it by the door with 2 more notes. For Theo. For Marcus. He gathered the glove, now dark and ready, and laid it on the quilt as if returning something borrowed. He turned to leave, then stopped and went back to the notebook. 1 more name. 1 more pause. He tapped the pen twice, closed the cover, and slid it into the shoebox. There was no clinging in any of it. No hiding. No breaking. Only work. Quiet, stubborn work. turning what our boy loved into gifts for boys, still learning how to hold themselves steady in a wide and shaking world. The final video ended with a small thing. He went to the doorway, hand on the knob, and looked back. Not long. Just long enough to make sure the desk was clear, the quilt straight, the bat blank safe by the door. He nodded once, as if the room had answered him, and stepped out into the hall. I watched the empty frame for a full minute, my phone warm in my hands. It did not break me in anger. It brought me to my knees, not because the camera had found him guilty of something secret, but because it had found him faithful in a way I had not understood. A father finishing what a son set down, a man turning grief into tools and letters and prayers with names, love made useful. I slid my chair back and stood because sitting felt untrue. I went to the hallway, laid my palm against that old door, and finally, turned the knob. The room met me with clean edges and the hush of work done right. The desk gleamed under a thin film of oil wiped to nothing. The quilt waited with its new small stitches. The bat blanks leaned by the door like tall boys at attention. On the desk, the shoebox, the towel folded square, the Bible open to a page that had learned his touch. I did not sit. I stood long enough for my heartbeat to slow, then I closed the Bible gently and put both hands on the cover. When I turned to leave, he was in the hall, not surprised to find me there. The washer had finished. His hands were empty. His face was the one he wears when a job is almost done and he wants to check the torque once more anyway. I told him I had seen. I said it plain. The words lay between us like a tool we both understood. He looked past me into the room and then back at me. No flinch, no defense. A long breath, the kind a man takes when he decides to lay everything on the table a piece at a time. We went to the kitchen because our house believes truth belongs at that little counter where we have eaten every hard thing we've ever had to chew. He took the chair that faces the hallway. I stayed standing because my legs needed to. He told me he could not make words behave in daylight. He said the midnight hour gave him shape when the day gave him fog. He said our boy's room felt like a shop bay with the hood up, a place to set grief down and work on it with the right wrench. He opened the shoebox and showed me the notebook. Pages of careful print. Short verses, first names, notes that read like promises kept. Delivered bat. Jamal. Glove fixed. Marcus. Letter mailed. Theo. Ask Aaron about ankle. Call Elijah's grandma. Yori. Rides. In the back, a list of addresses copied from church rosters and text threads and the folded sign-up sheets I keep in the drawer by the phone. He admitted the first night was clumsy. He said he stood in the dark and asked what a father does when the fathering has nowhere to go. Then he saw the glove on the shelf and the jar of oil in our garage and remembered the bat blank our boy bought and never got to shape. He said his hands knew what to do before his mind did. The letters came next, not because talking was impossible, but because he wanted the boys to have a thing they could hold when the field grew loud and the world told them they were only as good as their last swing. I asked why the names were in that order. He pointed to the notes. Tryouts, grades, quiets, lost tempers, unfair calls, the long ride home after the funeral. He said he started with the boys most likely to drop the game because it hurt to touch what our son loved. He said he moved outward from there until the roster felt whole again. The envelope on top said Jamal. He slid it to me. I did not open it. I ran my thumb along the crease he had pressed with his own thumb and felt how smooth it was. He showed me the sticky note at the end of the bat blank. For Jamal. Keep swinging. The handwriting was his careful shop print, the same letters he writes on parts bins and labels on coolant jugs, now steadying boys who still trip over their laces. The next morning, he shaved early and put on the shirt he saves for Sundays that are not Sundays. We drove without the radio. The town sat quiet in its early light, all porches and dew and the long, skinny cat that patrols the fence behind the diner. We stopped at 3 houses. He didn't ask me to wait in the car. We walked together to each door. At Jamal's, His mother opened in a robe, hand to her chest, surprised to see us but not wary. My husband held out the bat blank, sanded smooth and ready for sealing, and the letter. He said only the boy's name and that our son had started this bat, and he wanted Jamal to finish it with the coach. Jamal appeared in the hallway like boys do when they want to be casual and can't. He took the bat like a newborn. He held the letter like it might speak out loud. His mother's eyes filled and did not spill. At Marcus's, we left a glove on the porch with a note because no one was home. At Theo's, his grandmother took our hands and said the thing I had not let myself say out loud yet. This is healing. She said it with the clarity of women who have stood in kitchens and watched men choose between breaking and building and have seen both. Word moved the way it always does in a small place, through porches and pews and the space between the cashier's hello and the bag's rustle. A coach sent a text with a photo of 3 boys swinging bat blanks in the air like they were already finished. A grandmother called to say a letter had arrived with advice about keeping your shoulders square in your head when a call feels wrong. The pastor mentioned quiet acts that mend from the pulpit without names. The men at the shop nodded at my husband with a respect that did not need asking. At home, consequences felt like air moving in a room that had been closed too long. The chair by the window found him at 6:30 a.m. again. Morning prayer came back without force. He still set the washer late, but some nights he let the load finish on its own. The door to our son's room stayed closed until it didn't. Some afternoons we opened it wide and let light lay across the quilt. He taught me how to oil a glove so the pocket holds its shape. I showed him how to knot the thread so the stitch won't creep. He laid the list on the counter and we went through the names together. We added 2 from the church who weren't on the team but carried the same heavy look our boy had in 8th grade when the world tried to hurry him past his own pace. My husband wrote fresh notes in the margins. Invite to Saturday. Ask about trumpet. Rides to practice. Coordinate. The pastor stopped by, and this time, my husband didn't sidestep the men's breakfast. He said he'd show up late after deliveries. The pastor said late was fine. Some work can't be rushed. They both looked toward the hall and then away, in the way of men who have agreed on something without paperwork. There were small costs. Exhaustion that clung in the corners. A day when a letter didn't land right and a boy shrugged like he didn't care. Though his mother texted me later to say he read it twice in his room with the door closed. A Sunday when the bat blanks remained bat blanks because grief sits back down sometimes and asks you to sit with it a while. But the weight had shifted. We weren't carrying a closed door anymore. We were carrying names. That week, we moved one more thing. The quilt left the bed and came to the living room couch, where it could be pulled over knees during evening news and wrapped around our grandson during cartoons. The room did not feel like a shrine. It felt like a workshop that had done what it was asked to do. On Thursday, I found my husband at the desk in the good light of afternoon, not midnight. He was sanding the handle of a new bat blank and humming off-key. The list on the drawer had more check marks than boxes now. He looked up and asked if I would write the next set of envelopes. I said yes and pulled a chair. The consequence of the camera was not a fight. It was a table with 2 chairs pulled close, names written in our 2 hands, and the quiet agreement that the love we could no longer hand to our son would not go to waste. We did not hunt a villain. We named the enemy plain: despair. And then we set about starving it. Saturday, we opened the garage at 9. Sawhorses became workbenches, sandpaper in stacks, old rags, a coffee can for laces. The boys came in 2s and 3s, hats backward, eyes unsure. My husband greeted each by name, put a bat blank in his hands, and said, "You'll finish this. I'll show you how he taught grip first. Hands together. No gaps. Pressure here." He showed them how to sight down the wood, where to mark the swell, how to sand without burning the grain. I set up a glove table, oil, string, a ball wrapped in twine. "This is patience," I told them. "Leather remembers." They leaned in like mechanics over a hood. We kept the talk simple. Respect the tool, respect the game, Respect yourself when the call goes against you. We paused for water and wrote names on painter's tape to label each bat. Jamal's shoulders dropped an inch the first time the handle fit his palm. Theo smiled with only one side of his mouth, his tell when he's proud. Marcus stitched a torn lace clean through on the first try. My husband said, "That's tidy work," like he says to men he trusts at the shop. Before lunch, we circled up. Not a sermon, not a speech, 1 minute of quiet, our son's favorite ritual. "Think of one good thing from this week," my husband said. "Hold it." That's your anchor when you're down a run. Heads bowed. A bird shouted from the maple. Somebody's phone buzzed and nobody moved. It felt like balance. Justice looked like this. Letters in backpacks, skill in hands, boys who'd been slipping, showing up early the next day to keep sanding, a coach adding the 1 minute quiet before practice, grandmothers sending sweet tea and sitting on lawn chairs to watch. We didn't fix every ache. We gave the ache honest work. There were small reckonings. A boy who'd mouthed off to an ump asked if he could start over with a note of apology. My husband helped him write it, then drove him to hand it over face to face. Another wanted to quit because the field felt like a reminder instead of a joy. We asked him for one more inning, promised he could lay it down after if it still hurt the same. He stayed the season. We took the workshop outside once practice started. A folding table near the dugout with sandpaper and oil, a spare glove for whoever forgot theirs, envelopes for the day's letters. The ritual spread, not big, not loud, just steady. A boy would strike out, breathe, and touch the barrel of his bat to the ground like a reset. Another would help a teammate relace between innings. The coach nodded at us across the fence and tapped the bill of his cap. On Sundays, when the pastor spoke of acts that repair the torn places, we didn't look down. We knew our names weren't in his notes. We also knew our names didn't need to be. Justice in our house meant refusing to let grief turn mean or idle. It meant turning love into things that can be held and learned and passed along. By month's end, the list in the drawer was nearly full of check marks. New lines kept appearing. Neighbors' nephews, a boy from the next town whose dad worked nights, the shy kid from choir who wasn't sure he belonged anywhere with lines on the ground. Each got something with weight, a tool, a task, a letter, a welcome. We didn't bring our son back. We brought back the part of us that knows how to give. That was the justice we could reach. We opened the door and let the day in, not as a ceremony, just a Tuesday with decent light. Dust lifted like it had been waiting for the cue. I pulled the curtains wide. He propped the window. The room breathed. The quilt left the bed and found our couch, where it could do its real work. Warm knees during the news, hold our grandson during cartoons, catch cracker crumbs like stars. The bat blanks moved to the garage, not as relics, but as projects with sawdust in their future. The glove, our boy's glove, hung on a hook by the back door, oiled and honest, ready for any hand that needed a catch. Morning prayer came back to its chair at 6:30 without being forced. Some nights the washer still hummed late, but it didn't rule the clock. He went into the room in the afternoon sometimes, in full sun, to measure or copy a verse or check a name off the list. He hummed when he sanded. Off-key. Beautiful. We thinned the shrine feeling by letting living things in. Our daughter and grandson started using the desk for homework. A photo from the team banquet joined the shelf. Boys taller now, shoulders a little squarer, holding bats they had finished themselves. A paper cup with 3 pencils sat where the shoebox used to hide. The Bible stayed near, pages worn to soft. Saturdays found a rhythm. Workshop for whoever showed up, letters for whoever needed one, deliveries folded into errands. We learned to share the work. He taught me the quick way to cite a bowed board. I taught him how to address envelopes so the postmaster smiles. We argued once about whether Jamal should go up a bat weight. We laughed before we were done arguing. Not every day was light. Grief still knocked, sometimes loud, sometimes like rain. You only hear when the house falls quiet. On those days, we named it and stayed simple. One letter, one stitch, one stop by the field just to watch sun on the dirt and remember the sound of cleats. We did not pretend we were past it. We let it have a chair, not the whole table. Spring swung to summer. The dogwood we planted in the yard took hold. Thin trunk, brave green, a promise you can't rush. On evenings when practice ran late, boys cut through our alley and waved. One yelled, "Coach, look!" though he meant my husband, not the official coach, holding up a bat so smooth it glowed. My husband lifted a hand and nodded like a man who knows that pride needs only a small place to stand. At church, the pastor started asking my husband to carry the offering plates with the deacons again. He said yes. I passed peppermints down the pew to a fidgety kid and remembered when our boy used to unwrap his sloe so the crinkle wouldn't echo. The choir sang a hymn we'd avoided since the funeral. We stayed. We sang. Not perfectly. True enough. One evening, our grandson asked if the glove by the door could be anyone's for practice. We said yes. He slipped it on and winced at the size, then smiled when it shaped to him anyway. In the yard, he tossed a ball and missed, then tried again and again until the pocket caught and held. "Leather remembers," I said. He didn't look up, just answered, "So do people," and threw again. By fall, the list in the drawer turned into a tradition. One bat each season for a kid who needed strength. One letter a week, even when no one asked. 1 minute of quiet before any big thing. We kept a small basket by the door with stamps, sandpaper, and a roll of painter's tape. A home kit for steadying. We did not fix the world. We did change our corner. The room that once held only hush now held a draft of air, a pencil tapping, a boy laughing at his own wild swing. The work did not erase the ache. It gave it a path. Love, turned useful, kept walking. Not every love has words. Some loves are built, sanded, stitched, stamped, and handed over. For weeks, I thought my husband was trapped in the past. The camera taught me something quieter and truer. Grief is heavy, but it can be carried if you give it handles. He carved them. Bats and letters, a list of names, a habit of prayer, so the weight could move from sorrow to service. Healing, I've learned, isn't a finish line or a verse you recite until the ache obeys. It's a set of small verbs done faithfully. Oil the glove, write the name, knock on the door, stand in the sun, listen more than you speak. Do one good thing for one real person, and let that be enough for the day. Then do it again tomorrow. Our son's room did not become a shrine or a secret. It became a workshop where love learned a trade. A father apprenticed his grief to kindness. A mother joined the shift. Boys found tools in their hands and steadiness in their bones. The work didn't erase the missing. It made room beside it. Room for sunlight, for laughter that doesn't feel like betrayal, for a future that can hold both memory and motion. If there is a lesson I will keep, it is this. When you cannot speak your pain, make something useful with it. Choose one name and start there. Bless what you can reach. Let the sacred be ordinary enough to hold. Wood worn smooth, paper creased, a glove ready for the next catch. This was my story. Now tell me. What part touched your heart the most? 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 Touched your heart the most?